Hello, comrades. The AST is among us, and I figured out a proper strategy on how to do the verbal section on the multiple choice. So, a quick before I start this video, how I found this strategy was basically by analyzing every single verbal question that I got wrong, and then I noticed a pattern. And all of the verbal questions follow this exact pattern, right? So, first let's start with some definitions. So, explicit. Explicit. That means something that is stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. This means that it's being directly said. For example, I'm explicitly wearing a blue shirt, right? Maybe implicitly this implies that I'm having a sad day or something. But explicit means it's directly there, there's no room for confusion or doubt. It isn't implied. So in the AST, you don't need to get any of the answers in a wishy-washy way. The answers to all the V questions are explicitly in the text. Okay, so that's the first thing, explicit. The next thing is a central theme. This is the main idea of a text, the general vibe/gist of a poem, text, or painting. This is very important to grasp. After you get this, all the answers just come to you in your head. So, how to solve any AST verbal cue, and there's examples coming. The AST is a standardized test. That means that anyone, regardless of their specific knowledge, should be able to answer all the questions. Anyone doing the test, including you, should be able to answer all the questions. It doesn't require some external knowledge or you to memorize any formulas or anything. You should just be able to do everything. So, consequently, every answer will be directly, explicitly said in the question. You should read the text carefully, spending a bit longer than you think you should reading the actual questions and reading the passages. So a lot of people just skim through them, right? They just quickly look through all the passages, but you shouldn't do that. You need to actively read it. You need to be going through it, and you need to make sure you really, really understand what it's saying. After this, you'll be able to know the central theme of that text. So if there's a long paragraph, then in the reading time, you should fully read it. Or even if it's not in the reading time, when you're attempting a question, you should fully read the text and then you should answer the questions. Okay, then you look at the questions. Most of them you should just know the answer now. Generally, two answers are obviously wrong, and we'll show examples of this later. Now, the other two, this is where it gets tricky. This is especially where I got it wrong in the recent trial. So what you have to do is you have to pick between the two that are not obviously wrong. And now, only one will have explicit evidence, right? This is crucial. Only one of them will have explicit evidence. The other one, it might be implied, but it's not explicitly there. So this is the case. Let's start with some examples. And now throughout this, what I want you to do is I need you guys to really make sure that you're paying full attention to this bit, right? That you're not doing anything else in the background, that you're actively paying attention and trying to understand this, because this is really crucial. Once you get this, you'll just get the AST, right? So first thing you should do is you should look at the question, right? So below the painting, composition 8 by the artist, something followed by a quotation from the artist. Okay, instantly what do I notice about the painting? Lots of colors, it's lots of abstract. It looks a bit meaningless, right? But it's got lots of things going on, there's abstract shapes. Okay, color is the keyboard, the eyes are the hammer, the soul is the piano with many strings, the artist is the hand that plays, touching one key or another purposely to cause vibrations in the soul. Now, I've got to understand this. I just read that, but I didn't understand it at all. So I'll read it again. Color is the keyboard. Okay. The eyes are the hammers. Okay. The soul is the piano with many strings. The artist is the hand that plays, touching one key or another purposefully to cause vibrations in the soul. So now what I think this means is that the artist, right, is playing the keyboard, which is color. So the artist uses colors, and using colors, right, they cause vibrations in the soul. What causes vibrations? The hammers, right? So the audience, right, they have eyes, which are the hammers, right? And when they see the color, which is the keyboard being played, which is what the artist was doing, they get vibrations in their soul. So basically, what this whole thing is saying is that the artist uses colors, right, so that the viewers look at those colors with their eyes, and then they are touched by it. Okay, so let's read the question. The comment by Kadinsky. A. Sheds no light on composition 8, reflects the nature of composition 8, describes how composition 8 was created, contrasts with the nature of composition 8. So, A is instantly gone, right? because it doesn't shed no light on composition 8. Both the painting, the first thing we saw when we saw the painting was that color that hit us, right? And the caption both describe something, so it's not A. C is wrong because it's not explicit. So C describes how composition 8 was created. Nowhere in the quote does it actually say, this is how I created composition 8, or this artwork was influenced. It doesn't say how at all. Remember, in the AST, it has to be explicit, right? So maybe it's implied that the author, Vasily Kandinsky, right, maybe it's implied that he was thinking about the color, right? But that's not explicit. Do you see what I'm saying? So what you actually need to see is it explicitly in the text? No, it's not. D. Does it contrast with the nature of composition 8? Well, D is wrong for the same reason A is. It doesn't contrast with the nature of composition 8 because composition 8 nature is that color. That was the central idea of the painting, right? So when we looked at the painting at the start, we looked for the central idea, and that central idea was color, right? Because we've got all these abstract shapes, but then we've got all this color. This color really gives it meaning, and that's what the caption is about, right? So the image and the caption are clearly related. Both caption and image have the fundamental message of color. So now finally let's look at B, reflects the nature of composition 8. B explicitly describes a quote because the quote reflects and is directly related to the nature of the image. And the nature of the image was to use color to give emotion and elicit a response from the reader. So we look at this painting and the first thing we see is a color. So that's actually us. We have had our responses listed. We have done what the Vasily Kandinsky was saying, right? So that's exactly explicitly a link. Because also, this is what is, so in the caption, right, this guy Kandinsky or whatever, he's reflecting upon the nature of that painting. Color is the keyboard, the eyes are the hammers. This whole message is reflecting upon that image, right? So it's explicitly given. Everything else, either instantly wrong. A and D were instantly wrong, right? Sheds no light, that's instantly wrong. Contrast, that's instantly wrong. So now how do we know between B reflects or describes how it was created? Well, it doesn't actually tell us, oh, this is how I created it, right? It doesn't explicitly say that, but it does explicitly reflect the nature, and hence the answer is B. Okay, example 2. Now, again, I want you to pause. I want you to pause, and I want you to read the text. Right? For all of these, I want you to pause and read the text now. Okay, so I assume you're done reading the text. If you haven't, then actually read it. Pause and read it. So, all the answers are explicitly in the text. The writer suggests that fashion and photography are liminal forms because they have no boundaries, are distinct categories, are indistinguishable from each other. Now, I have no idea what this word liminal means. No idea, right? So I could get out my dictionary and look at it. That's fine. You should do that, right? If you have time, you should do that. But even without doing that, because actually, I'll tell you now, liminal means on the boundary, right? But I didn't know that before. When I was answering this question, I had no idea. So how do we do this? Have no boundaries. Does it say that fashion and photography have no boundaries? No, it doesn't. Nowhere in the text does it say they have no boundaries. Right? Does it say they are distinct categories? Well, fashion and photography are distinct categories, but it doesn't say that. Right? That's that crux move. It doesn't say that they are distinct categories. Right? And it explicitly says B. Also, D are indistinguishable from each other. Well, first of all, fashion and photography, there would be a problem if they were indistinguishable. They are distinguishable, right? And that's not why it's saying liminal forms. So B is on the boundary. This question has two meanings. It's to check that you know what the word liminal means, or it's you're able to check the evidence. So if we look at this very first sentence, both are liminal forms on the threshold between art and non-art. Threshold means the boundary. Oh, it explicitly says they're on the boundary. It directly says the answer. So the verbal questions are actually really easy. They directly tell you the answer. Now the statement, let's look at question 12. The statement by John Clare that now is past, line 7, is best described as A, nostalgic, B, romantic, C, orthodox, and D, paradoxical. Now, let's look at B, romantic. Does it say anywhere in this whole thing, when we look at now is past up here, now is past, okay, far from stopping time, they locate us in history. Now is past, wrote the 18th century poet John Clare, and the now of fashion is nostalgia in the making. Nothing about romance. It might talk about romance. Yeah, I would say now is past. That's a romantic statement, right? Maybe it is. But it doesn't explicitly say that, right? You need to have that direct link um, for it to be the answer. And that's what the AST is looking for. Can you see those direct links? Okay. C, orthodox. Does it say it's orthodox? Does it say it's traditional? And also, direct doesn't mean they just say the word. Direct means they could say synonyms. If they, instead of saying nostalgic, they could say like reminiscent, or they could say something else that means nostalgic, right? That's still direct. That's still explicit. But here, it says nothing about orthodox, and it says nothing about paradoxical. Sure, the line now is past. Well, that is paradoxical. How can now be past? Right? But it's not explicitly said. It actually says the now of fashion is nostalgia in the making, hence it's A, nostalgia. It's directed. Okay, 13. This is probably a really good example of it. The writer suggests that clothes communicate more subtly than most objects, lines 11 and 12, because they are. Okay, let's read lines. Let's read lines 10 to 12. Okay, since clothes are among the most fraught objects in the material world of things, since they are so closely involved with the human body and the human life cycle. That means they're very intimate, they're very physically close to us, right? They're closely involved with the human body. Okay, now let's read line 11 and 12. They are objects, but they are also images. They communicate more subtly than most objects in commodity. Precisely because of that intimate relationship to our bodies and ourselves, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Physically intimate. Because of that intimate relationship to our bodies, closely involved with the human bodies, these directly, explicitly, there's that word again, explicitly, tell us that the clothes are physically intimate. Okay, material and spiritual, gone. Right? Nothing about it does it say material and spiritual. It does say in the material world of things. Sure, they're in the material world of things. Does that mean material and spiritual? No. The only right way to be doesn't tell you about that at all. D, a psychological language. This is where a lot of people trip up. Right? Because the next sentence, it says, so that we speak, however loosely, of both a language and a psychology of dress. Now, sure, right? Clothes are a language and a psychology of dress. So they are psychological languages. But the sentence that it's asking for, clothes communicate more subtly than most objects, right? Because they are intimate relationships to our body. Let's just read this entire sentence. They communicate more subtly than most objects and commodity precisely because of that intimate relationship to our bodies. It's actually just telling you. It literally says the answer. Why does it communicate more subtly? Precisely because of that intimate relationship to our bodies. Physically intimate. Physically intimate, right? There's no need to try and find a secret implied message. The answers are all in the text. Okay, example 3. Have a look at this photo. The drawing below by Irina Ivanova shows women's fashions of the 1920s. So first, remember what we have to do. We have to look at it. We just have to analyze it carefully. Spend more time than you think analyzing it. Okay, first thing that we notice, color. Second thing we notice, there's this shadow next to it. So now this one, right, I wouldn't be able to tell the key message really straight away. It's a bit confusing, isn't it? So what we do is we look at the options. The drawing, is best described as A, photographic realism, B, a symbolic composition, C, a dramatic representation, or D, stylized rather than realistic. So now let's go through all of them. A is clearly wrong. The image is not photographic or meant to be realistic. Look at it. It's not photographic at all, right? It's not explicitly a photograph. It's not trying to be real, is it? So now B. So actually, let's go to C first. C, a dramatic representation. Actually, no. Let's go to B, a symbolic composition. I actually originally thought B was right. But if it was a symbolic composition, this is what's important. If it was a symbolic composition, they would tell you what it's symbolic for, right? We aren't told anything from the image. We can't gather the symbol from the image. What is it symbolic for? If I look at it, sure, it can be symbolic, but what is it symbolizing? There's a woman in yellow, a woman in white, some other women next to it. What is it symbolizing? No, it doesn't explicitly say. At the end, I kind of talk about over here what it symbolizes, but that's not explicit. That's not explicit, so it's not going to be the answer. Okay, then let's look at C, a dramatic representation. So this is a tough one because we don't really know about the women's fashions in 1920. What were they really like, right? So we don't know what an accurate representation looks like. But it's not explicitly or obviously dramatic or flashy. Remember, they expect everyone, right? Everyone, regardless of their knowledge of the 1920s fashion, to be able to answer this, right? So if it was something dramatic, they would make it bang, in your face, dramatic, a big pop of color or something, right? But they don't do that. Like you might say, oh, but this yellow is a big flash of color. No, it's not dramatic, is it? It's not really dramatic, right? So that's why it's not C. So D is correct because one, it's not realistic, right? It says stylized rather than realistic. Well, it's not realistic. It's a drawing, not supposed to be like a photograph. And then two, the stylistic part of it. Stylistic is a vague word, but actually we can explicitly see the stylization in the image because the other figures are looking at the middle figure who is the most colors, right? This is stylization, right? This is what they've done with the style, you know what I'm saying? And it's made to look nice as well. They've got the second part of it is like each of them have their silhouettes next to them. So there's this girl colored, there's this other girl not colored, a silhouette of that. There's a girl colored, another girl not colored. So this is the stylization, right? It's talking about it. That's what they've done to make it look nice, right? So that's why it's D. I hope that kind of helps because this is quite a tricky question, right? And now, if there were more questions on this, they could use that there are. We could use the fact, right, just from looking at it. Another thing that we could kind of think of, right? Maybe, yeah, okay. Another thing we could kind of look for is that there are prominent figures that are colored. There's this bright yellow girl. There's this bright girl in the hat. There's this other bright girl, looks like she's wearing like a newspaper or something, right? And then next to them, there's silhouettes. This could represent, right, how in the 1920s there were very influential, prominent figures, and the masses merely copied them. Yeah, it could talk about like there's one massive, prominent, famous figure wears something, and everyone else copies that. But you know what I'm about to say, don't you? It's not, you can say it, explicit. It's not explicit at all, right? So it's not supposed to be symbolizing that, which was B, because it's not explicitly shown. If they had a caption or something that was like that, then sure, right? But it's not explicit. Okay, so there's quite a few more of them, so we'll start going. A 21st century dilemma. Okay, looking at first thing, as always, look at the image. Small guy, big nose, right? There's shops, heaps and heaps of shops. They all say the same thing. 21st century dilemma. Nice word. Okay, so it's a comic. Okay, so we look at it and we see this tiny figure looking up at all the possible options which are shops. The first thing I think is this guy's powerless, right? This guy's tiny compared to all the options, right? And now the second thing, all the signs say the same thing, shops. This might be obvious, but remember, explicit things are obvious enough that anyone should be able to tell them, right? So because all of these things are the same, they're meaningless. That means that the answer is A. So let's look at the question. The point of the cartoon is that people in the 21st century, A, have no meaningful choices. B, enjoy having many meaningful choices. C, have too many meaningful choices. Or D, are in conflict about meaningful choices. So after looking at these, I know that it's about meaningful choices, right? They all have them. So I have to see, does it have none of them? Does this guy enjoy it? Does this guy have too many of them? Or are they in conflict? And what does the image tell me? Okay, so I'm looking at it. This guy's powerless, right? He's looking up, he's looking confused because he has no idea which shop to go to. He has no motivation to go to any of them, right? It's an empty, completely empty world, right? And it's just a bunch of shops. So now let's look at why it's not B, C, or D. B is instantly ruled out. Does he enjoy having meaningful choices? It doesn't say anywhere that's enjoying it. He doesn't have a big grin on his face or something, right? He's not explicitly enjoying it, right? And as before we said, all the signs say the same thing, shops. They're all meaningless, right? Okay. C, have too many meaningful choices. C is ruled out because, again, all the signs are the same, so they're not meaningful. He doesn't have any meaningful choices, right? That's obvious because you could see that he has, actually, it's not so obvious. He has a lot of these choices, but does it mean anything for him to choose one over the other? No, they're meaningless. It's like if I highlighted everything on a page, right, then I've highlighted nothing at all. So it's meaningless in this sense. D, now, is he in conflict? Oh, sorry. Is he in conflict about meaningful choices? Well, he's not explicitly in conflict. He doesn't have two things, one and the other. He's not conflicting them, so it's not D, right? So this question, the answer is A. He has no meaningful choices. So this is a big example of look for central themes plus what's explicitly there, what's explicitly not there. So that's another thing. You can use the inverse. If you know that it's not explicitly there, go on, right? Straight away, cross, cross, bam, bam, go on, right? And then you'll shorten your options, and then you'll be able to figure out the right answer. Okay, here's the pro strat for poems. So as I was saying before, you need to actively read the poem in detail, right? You need to try and understand everything you read. You might be thinking, these poems make no sense, but they do make sense. They do make sense, and you can understand it, right? Because, remember, they're made for everyone to understand. You don't need to be getting an A in literature to know what these poems means, because they have to be obvious and explicit, right? So you want to try and understand everything they say and figure out the key message of the poem. Key message. Read the supporting caption up top. So pause and actually do this. Now also, spend more time than you think. Okay, I hope you've paused. If you haven't, then pause. Okay, so now let's analyze it. Giving up words with words. So the following poem is generally to be about poetry. Well, we know it's about poetry, so we should try and put on our poetry glasses and look through it through that lens. Isn't it time to let things be? I don't pick up the drafts books. I ease out of the typewriter room. So this instantly easy, bro. It sets the tone out for the poem. Time to let things be. I don't pick up the book. I leave the typewriter room. This means that the stance of the poem is against poetry. It's not praising poetry. Oh, poetry is something we can immortalize everything. No, it's not. Right? It's saying that it's time to let things be. I don't pick up the book. I don't write anything in it. It's not needed to write down everything. Just let things happen. This is the big idea or central theme of the poem. Okay, right? And now, why do I keep saying, think about the central theme? Once you've got the central theme, then you can instantly rule out half of the options. For example, right, we haven't even looked at the rest of the poem. Those are just the first three sentences. I've got the big idea, right? Line 4 and 5 present poetry as a trap, an ornament, entertainment, and enlightenment. I haven't read lines 4 and 5. I already know they're not an entertainment. I already know they're not an enlightenment, and I don't know. And they could be an ornament. It doesn't say anything about that. Okay, but I've eliminated C and D already. Lines 14 and 15 present writing as creative. Well, the stance is against it, so it's not creative. D, sympathetic. Well, I would probably guess not, right? It might be, but I would guess not. 23. The speaker considers a move from description towards. Okay, it doesn't really tell us much about this, but we were able, just from those first three lines, to wither down half the options. Okay, so the next thing. I ease out of the typewriter room. Bumblebee's wings swirl, free of the fine spun of words. Okay, I look at this, free of the fine spun of words. The bumblebee's wings swirl. Imagine that. A bumblebee that was trapped in a spun, kind of like a spiderweb, right? And now it's flying away. And what was that spun? What was that spiderweb? That was words. We know the general stance of the poem is against poetry, right? We don't need to write down poetry and record everything. We should just let things be. That's the key idea. Now it's saying that the bumblebee is free of the fine spun of words. That's basically saying that the words, they're a fine spun, they're a spiderweb. They're trapping the bumblebee, right? So the line explicitly states that the words trap the bumblebee, which is symbolic of whatever the poem is about. right? It's not always going to be a bumblebee, right? That's not always the theme of the poem. But what this bumblebee is representing is whatever's in the poem, whatever you're writing down, right? Um, After we stopped writing, which is what this first stanza means a paragraph in a poem, is after that, after we stopped writing, the bumblebee is free of the fine spun of words. Imagine a bug becoming free of the spider web of a spider. Becoming free of a spider web. This means the answer to question 21. Lines 4 and 5 present poetry as a trap. A trap. Okay, let's look down. A leaf down bed, shadow mingling, tumbling with the leaf, with no help from me. Do things let alone. Okay, kind of this paragraph just adds to the main idea. No help from me, do things let alone. That's kind of like the saying is, it's time to let things be. We don't need to write down everything, just let things happen. Okay, keep reading. Go to pieces is rescue written, already into the motions of coherence. Have words all along emitted work better done undone. Okay, so let's look at question 22, lines 14 and 15, which is one thinks not ruthlessly to bestir again, one eases of harsh intentions. So that's the next line, right? Present writing as futile, creative, aggressive, or sympathetic. Now, this word better done undone, you might be thinking that explicitly means futile. Hey, that's explicit. But no, this is how the AST weeds out people, right? Because you get trapped. They use all these tricks. You think better done undone, right? Imitated work better done undone. That means the writing is futile, right? It's better off it wasn't done. But look, this is line 13, not 14 and 15. So this highlights another thing. If it's asking what lines 14 and 15 present, it's asking what lines 14 and 15 present. It's not asking you what the other lines present, okay? So now let's look at line 14 from 15. One thinks not ruthlessly to bestir again. One eases of harsh intentions. That means that let's look at these words. Ruthlessly, bestir, harsh. What's the vibe of that? That's aggressive, isn't it? If something's ruthless and it's bestirring harsh attention, right? That's a synonym of aggressive. That means it's explicitly saying aggressive. So the answer is C, right? So it doesn't need to exactly say it to be explicit. You can say synonyms. So 23, the speaker considers a move from description towards, well, now you should be able to answer this one. Relaxation, experience, excitement, or empowerment. What do you think it is? B, experience. Right? You didn't even need to look at the poem because you know that the main idea is to, what was it? It's not needed to write down everything. Just let things happen, right? Move from description, which is writing down everything, to experience. Let things happen. So, if we look at the last paragraph, to watch the dew dry, the squirrel stand, white belly prairie dog erect, the mayfly cling daylong to the doorstep. What does that mean? That's barely English, right? That's scary words to make you think, I have no idea what this poem means, right? But you don't need to think too much about it because it's explicitly given the meaning in the rest of the poem. So don't let it throw you off. So as you see, all these lines with the orange star, right? They contribute to the answer to question 23. They explicitly say it. So question 23 was saying a speaker moves from a description towards what? Well, isn't it time to let things be? I don't pick up the drafts book. Free of the fine spun of words. Have words all along imitated works better done undone? To watch the dew dry, the squirrel stand. It means, isn't it better to actually let things happen and just experience them and live in the moment than to analyze and write down everything? Hey, that's the answer. All making sense now, isn't it? Okay, let's look at example 7. So pause and read it. Okay, I assume you've read it. Let's look at question 28. According to the writer, how did expert scientists, line 6, arrive at the discovery of mad cow disease? A. Did they make a lucky guess? Well, nowhere in the text does it explicitly say they made a lucky guess. Not explicit, not the answer. Done. They had scientific proof that it was happening. Well, actually, there was no scientific proof, right? The whole thing was saying that they didn't need proof. That means they definitely don't have scientific proof, right? It was the only possible way explanation of what was happening. Okay, but right, this is what tricked me as well. This is and D is it was the most plausible explanation for what was happening. So C and D are both seem like they're the answer, right? You've eliminated A and B, which is what we were saying at the start. But now there's two tricky options. So let's look at C. Is it the only possible explanation of what was happening? Let's look down. So now, because we've read it all carefully and we understand, we remember, oh wait, there was another possible thing. That's what the, what was it called? The non-science people, right? All the government people were saying that feeding sheep to cows, right? That was actually what was happening. That was what was causing people to die, right? Yeah, that was causing people to get the disease, right? So that was C. That was their explanation. So as you can see that their discovery of mad cow disease, right, the commercial feed that contained dead sheep, right, that's the other possible explanation. Okay, so D, it was the most plausible explanation for what was happening. 29. The writer implies that when the scientist said something filled with imagination, line 11. Oh, also, sorry. And the evidence for D, for 28, the cause it seemed, okay, how did they arrive at their discovery? Well, they know the cause it seemed. They knew enough. They could imagine, right? How did the expert scientists arrive at their discovery of mad cow disease? They could imagine. Every fact is a field, a crisscross of explanations. So basically what this is saying is that they don't really need the proof, right? But they had figured it out because this is the most plausible thing. From the fact, right, they've got a crisscross of implication. That means that that has caused them to think this about the mad cow disease, which is why it's the most plausible explanation. Okay, 29. The writer implies that when the scientists said something filled with imagination, they were A. Expressing personal opinion. Nowhere does it say anything about that. Go on, instant. Avoid having to provide proof. Nope, that's wrong, right? Because the writer is for the scientist, right? The writer, if he's for the scientist, saying that we don't need proof, why would he say that they avoid having to provide proof? And it's not said explicitly in the text. Double gone, right? Making excuses for what they did know. Nope, he doesn't say that explicitly at all. Using what they knew to predict what they did know. That's the main idea of the entire text. What this is saying, what this whole thing about imagination is talking about using what you do know and imagining or predicting or like extrapolating what you think will happen or what you think should happen. So that's why the answer is D. Okay, 30. According to the writer, which one of the following did the technocrats, line 7, exploit in offer to deny the existence of mad cow disease? So let's look. A, their position as scientific expert. It doesn't say anything explicitly that they exploited that. B, their ignorance of scientific methods. It doesn't say anything about that. D, the lack of proof that dead sheep were being fed to cows. Right? So, did the technocrats exploit that? Well, it does mention that. The cause, it seemed, was a commercial feed which contained dead sheep. Right? But, right, they didn't they didn't explicitly say that that was why the technocrats were exploiting it. Because look at this sentence. They explicitly in the text for C, it was the managers, technocrats of government, industry, and agriculture who denied it. They said that there was no specific proof that such a leap was possible. Right? The lack of absolute scientific proof for anything. Right? Because later down, when the narrator, the author, talks about they look for truth, right? They look for why in truth, of course, and so they leapt upon a new minor idea. Then they know that when they're talking about the technocrats know the best way to control is to insist on belief. Belief in what? Why the truth, of course, right? And that alongside this no specific proof gives the answer of C. That the technocrats exploited the main idea of the paragraph is that there was no scientific proof for anything C. Okay, 31. I got this one wrong, right? But now I understand why. Because if we look at what's explicit, according to the writer, those in industry, line 24, regarded imagination, line 27, as what? A game, a threat, an illness, or an illusion. They didn't say anything about game. They didn't say anything about illusion. Go on. So it's between a threat and an illness. Now, let's look at the main idea of this last paragraph. But the major god here is the one most animated by fear. For those in authority, so this whole idea is about fear, right? It's all about the feel of the control going away. They know the best way to control is to insist on belief. So it's talking about control and fear, right? So they're regarding imagination as what? A threat. Okay, 32. Which of the following best describes the writer's tone in the sentence? Why is truth, of course, right? So, the sentence itself, right? Wherever the sentence was, over here, they knew the best way to control is to insist on belief. Belief in what? Why, in truth, of course. And so they leapt upon a new, if minor, idea. Okay, so the sentence idea is ironic. Their belief, which was about, their belief was actually wrong, right? So he's saying that they don't accept our scientific proof, but they insist on their own truth, which is baseless, right? And this author, remember, even if you don't explicitly think that, if you think the main message is that the main message this guy is saying, or the main stance of the paragraph, is that the author is for scientific proof and is against the technocrats, then he would say it sarcastically. You can just tell by the way it's written as well. Okay, let's have a look. Analyze this image. Black and white. Okay, there's a man looking smug, looking at his coffee. There's a lady looking at him. Looks like she's talking about something this guy doesn't care at all. Okay, let's look at his face expression. Now, what's a caption? When you say it's all good, what you really mean is I don't care. It's a quotation mark. Someone said it. Oh, who's talking? It's this lady. This lady is talking. She's talking to this guy. When you say it's all good, what you really mean is I don't care. This guy, is he doing something right now? Is he saying it's all good? Maybe, right? Because what is he doing? What is he not doing? Sorry, he's not caring. Look at his face. Look at this guy. He's not caring at all to what this lady is saying. So now we've got the main idea. Hey, you see what I was talking about? That's the main idea. So now the cartoon suggests that the woman's comment, so it even says the woman's comment, this is what the woman is saying, is A, correct, B, furious, C, paranoid, or deconstructed. The face of the man and women are most important. The man clearly does not care what the woman is saying. He is not even looking at her. This explicitly links to the caption, so it's A. Let me check the audio is still working. Yep. 37 minutes. Okay, it's a long video. Keep watching to the end though. It only gets better. We're almost done. This is explicitly links to the caption. So the man is not caring at all to what the woman's saying, right? That's explicitly linking to the caption. So the answer is A, which is correct. It is correct because this guy is not the cartoon, right? The cartoon seems like this guy is not caring at all about what the woman's saying, so it's correct. And now she's not explicitly furious, paranoid, or constructive, right? You might think she's furious because look at her like angry eyebrows, but is that explicit? Right? Angry eyebrows don't directly say that she's angry, right? Does it? It implies it. Implies means implicit, which means not explicit, right? So the answer is A because it's not furious, it's not explicitly furious, it's not explicitly paranoid or constructive, right? The cartoon doesn't show any of that at all. Okay, example 9. This is a big one, right? Actually, no, this is a small one, sorry. Just read through this one. Okay, I hope you've read through it. If you haven't, then rewind and read through it again. Okay, so now, it's about legislation. So the first thing was to read the caption. So we know the main idea is about legislation, okay? Let's think about the tone of this paragraph. Well, this guy, the whole thing, this guy has a negative tone against legislation. He doesn't say explicitly that all legislation is bad, so he doesn't think that. But what he's saying is that pretty much a lot of legislation has not met what it's trying to be met, right? And that's because no one analyzes the social consequences of it. Most of the time it's just for the politicians to say that they've done something or do something symbolically, right? So that's the main idea. And now you look at the narrator's stance, It's against the policymakers and the legislators, right? Because it seems that like what the legislators are doing, well, it's pretty useless, right? That's what his whole tone is throughout. So that's what you need to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, 56. In the context of the first paragraph, the words "the effect of legislation is at worst only benign" are used to emphasize the authors. Okay, it's talking about a specific line. Let's look at that line. Um, okay, is at worst only benign. Rarely are efforts made to look closely at the social consequences that new legislations will have, as there is a widespread belief that the effect of legislation is at worst only benign. Okay? These words, at worst only benign, are used to emphasize what? A. The author's opinion that opposite is true, prejudice against legislators, belief in the superiority of legislation, opposition in principle to all forms of legislation. Let's look at the sentence. It's explicitly saying that rarely efforts are made to look closely, right? Because there's a widespread belief that the worst thing a legislation can only do is, I don't know what this benign means, right? But I'm guessing that it means it doesn't make it worse. It just keeps it okay or the same, right? So at worst, the legislation only makes things okay, right? This is what the author is saying there's a widespread belief. But if you're talking about a widespread belief, he's not saying it's my belief, is it? So he's kind of emphasizing that it's not his own. And it's explicit because the sentence before that, also highlighted, says this. So explicitly links this. B, prejudice against legislators, nothing. It doesn't say that at all. Not explicit. C, belief in the superiority of legislation over other forms of law, nothing. Not explicit. D, opposition in principle to all forms of legislation. Where does it talk about all forms of legislation? It never does. It's not explicit. A is right. 57. The first paragraph suggests that the success or failure of parliamentary legislation depends on... Okay, first paragraph suggests. What's the main theme of the first paragraph? The main theme is that legislation right now, not so good, right? It sometimes made stuff a lot worse because no one looks at the social consequences. Yeah? So now let's look at the answers. Constitutional authority being used, suggests that the success or failure of parliamentary legislation depends on A, constitutional authority being used wisely, B, the number of other new acts which have an impact on society, C, factors some of which cannot be isolated until after legislation, D, the degree to which a piece of legislation shares the increasing complexity of society. Okay? A, constitutional authority being used widely and without repressive overtones, doesn't say anything about that. Does it talk about constitutional authority? No. B, the number of other new acts which have had an impact on society. Okay, it did talk about another act, right? But did it say anywhere explicitly that the number of other acts that have an impact affect the success of another one? No. D, the degree to which a piece of legislation shares the increasing complexity of society, doesn't say anything about that, right? But let's look at C. We have explicit, easy explicit evidence. So this whole thing, it was just explicit. Everything was explicit evidence. It directly just tells you the answer. Isn't that good? So it is important to look at the social, okay, circumstances that were existent prior, okay? It is as well as the social forces that were encountered by the legislation following its enactment. So it's important to look at the social factors after the legislation was implemented to see if it's effective. Hey, that's exactly what C is talking about. Factors, some of which cannot be isolated until after the legislation has been taken place. Done. 58. In the first paragraph, the author challenges the belief that legislation, okay, A, has a positive or at least neutral impact on the society for which it is designed. Oh, wait, I remember that. At least neutral. That's what the effect of legislation is at worst only benign. So that's what this whole sentence up here, it explicitly says the answer. In fact, new legislation may often do little or nothing to improve society. Okay? Has a positive or at least neutral impact on the society for which it is designed. He's challenging that belief, right? In fact, may have quite disastrous and unforeseen circumstances, such as repressive effect, blah, 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 blah. Okay? That's what he's saying. He's saying that Actually, the widespread belief was that all legislation, can't make something worse, can it? But this guy doesn't believe that. And he's like, hey, it does nothing to improve it and sometimes makes it even worse. Quite disastrous and unforeseen. That's A. So he's challenging that belief. 59. The second paragraph suggests of symbolic purposes mentioned for legislation that such purposes are. Let's read the second paragraph, right? The symbolic so, whilst, for example, a specific piece of legislation may have failed to achieve what it stated, objectives may be, failed to achieve what its stated objectives may be, it may yet achieve other purposes, such as symbolic purposes, which its framers saw essential to it. This line explicitly says that the answer is D. Sometimes the only purposes which legislation succeeds in achieving are the symbolic purposes, right? It failed to achieve what it wanted to, but it still achieved just that symbolic purpose. It only achieved the symbolic purpose. D explicitly gives you the answer. You don't need to think about anything. Okay, 60. The central theme of the passage is best summarized. Let's look at the whole paragraph. The main idea, right? It's saying that legislation not so good because they don't consider social consequences. Right? Maybe at the end, then at the end it says equally important as a preliminary issue is the adoption of a framework for analyzing legislative changes. Right? The adoption of a framework for analyzing legislative changes. Right? Combining that with the main idea, we get the answer is D. The central theme of the whole passage is support for a closer and more comprehensive analysis of the impacts which legislation has on societies. Because it's all talking about the social impacts of the legislation, right? Now, he's saying that it would be better if we had something to judge that, which is D, which is the main idea. So just from reading carefully, you're able to spot all these things. You might be thinking like, how did you spot all these things? All I did was I read it carefully, right? I spent longer than I thought I needed to read it. I didn't just skim through it. I read through it and understand the whole thing. Now I've got the main idea. The main idea is in my brain. I understand it super clearly. Now I know the main idea. So 60, it's just asking what the main idea is. I didn't even need to look back at the text. I just saw it. Answer is D. Done. Last one, guys. Read through this. Right? So it's talking about World War II. Right? It says World War II, but actually in the text, does it talk about World War II at all? Not really, right? So you don't really need to use a lot of outside information. Remember, even someone who hasn't studied Australian history should be able to answer this question, or hasn't studied World War II, right? Anyone should be able to answer these questions. Okay, so let's look at question 1. The last sentence of the first paragraphs, line 4 and 5, suggest, what are they? Well, what are the last sentences? Her breathing had become very short in the last few weeks. Inattentive and isolated as I was, I had noticed that she was even paler than usual. Inattentive and isolated as I was. So the girl who's narrating says she's inattentive and isolated, right? But she noticed that she's even paler than she usually is. Now, if she was usually inattentive, right? If you're not paying attention, you're not attentive, right? Would you notice the color of someone's face, right? Would you notice if their face is looking a little different? For example, if someone wore the same earrings every day and then they changed them up one day, you would notice, right? But if you didn't pay attention at all, right, then you wouldn't notice that small change. If you know what they usually look like, right, that means you're actually attentive. So the answer is D. It suggests that the narrator is not as inattentive and self-absorbed as she seems, right? So that's what it's explicit. C, does it talk about, and let's look at why A, B, and C are wrong. A, rationalizes narrator's behavior. No, it doesn't do that. B, emphasizes the narrator's dreaminess. Does it explicitly talk about her dreaminess? I don't think so. C, explains the narrator's distaste for music lesson. Does it? Inattentive and isolated as I was, I had noticed that she was even paler than usual. Does it say anything about her distaste? Nah. Gone. D, correct answer. 66. The narrator thinks, on her feet, oh God, because she... Now, this question. You need to think about the main central message of the paragraph. The paragraph is basically just telling you, the central idea of the paragraph is this girl realizes that lady, Miss Grunberg, she's not doing so well, is she? Right? She lives in a poorly furnished flat. Her breathing can become very short. She was even paler than usual, right? So the whole thing is talking about she's actually not doing so well, and the girl who's narrating, she knows this, right? So let's look at the line. The mother is like, oh wow, she's doing so well. She's going off somewhere by foot. She's going to give a recital in the assembly hall, right? Is she really going to be giving a recital in the assembly hall? Is she going to be shipped off to a concentration camp? We don't know, right? But it doesn't look too good for her, right? So this girl thinks, on her feet? Oh God, right? At least she's on her feet now. Oh God, that means she's like, oh, that's not a good thing, right? That means she's realizing that Miss Grunberg is not doing so well. It doesn't talk about C. It doesn't explicitly say that she wants her to be the teacher. It doesn't talk about B. It didn't say anything about her not wanting to be successful. And A, is she shocked about Miss Grunberg's success? No, because she wouldn't say on her feet, oh God, right? Why would you say, oh God, right? Like if you're shocked by her success, unless you like hate her or something. But it's not explicitly said, it's implied. D is explicitly said. Sorry. 67. Which of the following best describes the narrator's feelings at the end of the passage? She believes that Miss Grunberg, C, was no isolated and damaged than she. Right. Let's look at the green text. Waking in fright, I mourned for the first time my innocent victim and our shared fate. Right. She's talking about like my innocent victim and our shared fate. We have the same fate, right? We're the same, and we're no isolated. This lady is not more isolated than she is, because they have the same fate. The whole paragraph she's talking about, at the mercy of my dreams, her face wasting, crumbling to ash, blasted by the force of my terrible youth, right? This whole paragraph, alongside the main idea, and these explicit evidence in these sentences, waking in fright, I mourned for the first time my innocent victim and our shared fate. Right? That's all leading to the answer being C. Was no less isolated and damaged than she. D. Had been the primary cause? Nope. Doesn't say anything about that explicitly. B. Should have tried to understand her better? Where does it say that? Never. Not even once. Zilch. Nada. A. Was simply unloved and unlovable? Does it talk about that? Does the last paragraph, where she's talking about, and waking in fright, I mourned for the first time my innocent victim and our shared fate. Does that talk about her being simply unloved and unlovable? No, it doesn't. Okay, so now we've gone through some ideas, right? What were some things that we saw? Right, try and remember. The first thing, look for explicit links. Everyone's able to know the answers. Nothing will be implied. They will explicitly tell you all the answers in the text. Now another thing, after reading through it carefully, when doing the questions, right, if you're stuck, you will be able to eliminate two of them off the bat, easy, clean, right? Then it'll be tricky. You're stuck with two options. Look back over, and only one of them will have direct, explicit evidence. Now the other thing, you want to look through, read the text, look at the passage, look at the poem, look at the painting. You want to look at it carefully, and you want to analyze and understand every single little thing that happens, right? Obviously, don't spend the whole hour doing whatever that, like analyzing it. But you want to read through the text and you want to understand what it's saying, right? You don't just want to read it. You don't want it to just go through your head, because you can read things out and not understand it. Nothing is implicit or implied. They will explicitly tell you the answers in the text. You don't really understand that. But if you think nothing is implicit or implied, okay, I get what that means. They will explicitly tell you the answers in the text. Okay, I get it, right? Kind of like that, if that makes any sense, right? So then, that's the next thing. Okay, so you want to look through and find the key message. Generally, by finding the key message, you'll not only be able to eliminate the wrong answers easily, but you'll also be able to look for which one looks about right, and then you can check that, right? So maybe some of the things I've said in this don't work, right? But 99% of the time they will. 99% of the time they will, because the AST is a standardized test. Everyone has to sit this, right? And they need to give you all the answers. Example, in a passage, right? If they don't give you the answers, or they don't explicitly tell you the answers, then how are you supposed to find out? Are you supposed to know everything about the poem already? No. right? They have to explicitly tell you the answers that are without a doubt right. So the answers will be always 100% right. And because of that, they're explicitly said in the test, right? So read carefully and understand the text, then answer the questions. You can do it quickly. Now finally, the verbal questions are worth less than the quantitative questions, right? Because the short response tasks and writing tasks are also English. They're not going to assess your entire ASD based on just English. So you want to focus on those as well, right? I'm not making a video on those. Maybe I will next year or something. But you want to focus on those. Most of the time, they're not so hard. Even if you think I'm not so good at maths, you don't need to be, right? You saw the demonstrations. All you have to do is like multiply and add. Most of the time, you're looking for some similar stuff. You're looking for explicit evidence, and you're looking for correlation and causation. That's how you do Q questions. So you want to prioritize doing the ones of the Q questions that you can do, right? But remember, the whole point of this is you want to try and scoop up as many marks as possible. So if you think, oh, V question, okay, I can easily tell what this guy is looking like, right? I can easily tell them the answer, just do it, right? So the AST questions aren't hard. They're not hard at all. So you should be able to do all the questions. Make sure you're trying to able to do all the questions, answer all the questions, right? If you have time at the end, you can guess. No, you shouldn't have time at the end because you should be doing it carefully and getting everything right. But you should still be finishing all the questions, right? If you read it carefully, then you'll be able to answer the questions quickly. Example, I can read it once, and then I can go through the questions, and I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions, and maybe look back at the test twice. Now, what if I did them all with just by skimming through the text? So I skim through the text once. Then I do 56, and I have to skim through the text and look for the answer. Then I find it. Then I have to do 57, I have to skim through it again. I do 58, I have to skim through it again. 59, skim through it again. 60, skim through it again. That's 6 times I'm reading it, right? But if I just read it carefully, then I'll maybe only need to read it twice, right? Read it once and carefully skim through it once. So you'll save time in the long run. Oh. Okay. So, last key takeaway. Also, yeah, prioritize your time, right? Figure out in the reading time, read those long passages. Read the Q question that has heaps of information and try and understand it. Q questions are important. Don't leave those empty. V questions are important. Don't leave those empty. Don't leave any question empty. Answer all of them. Get 100%. You can. Remember, if you do well in the AST, it scales through the moon, right? And it's not so hard. We know all the techniques. So, very, very last thing. Remember, explicit, key message. Yeah, that's it. Explicit, key message. That's the AST done. 100% POG strategy. So, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and see you next time. Good luck!